About a year ago, my mom retired. As with many people who reach that milestone, Mom has had a gigantic list of projects that she's been wanting to get to but didn't have the time. In the last couple weeks, she's gotten started on another one of these long overdue projects. She has undertaken the task of taking a bunch of old VHS videotapes and playing and converting them into digital computer files. For her, the process involves watching these tapes again in real time and recording them into the computer. But what it means for me is that I'm starting to get video files sent to me over email, many of which bring up old memories and events that I haven't thought about in a very long time. Recently, she sent a video from Christmas of 1992, where I was opening a Batman car as a present. This was of particular interest to my boys because they've been playing with that car at Grandma and Grandpa's house, and seeing it brand new was kind of a trip. It's also kind of amazing to see the striking similarity between Levi and 11-year-old Alan.
Wow, that's a big one.
Watching that video made me think of a couple of other videos that I digitized a couple of years ago. One of which was actually from that same year, in 1992. My dad was a K-12 art teacher in our rather small school. And so when we were in 5th grade, he got our whole class to sit down and one by one, we made predictions about ourselves for when we were seniors in high school.
Hi, I'm Alan Stuckey, and I got good grades and I want to keep them up. I want to be good at sports and just have fun.
And then, when we were seniors in high school, on graduation day actually, right before the ceremony, he set up another camera and recorded us again, making predictions for 10 years in the future.
My name's Alan Stuckey. This summer I plan to be working at Graber's Plumbing. After that I'm going to go to Bethel, play some football, hopefully not die. I'm going to graduate there, and in 10 years I plan to not be working at Graber's Plumbing. Be married, possibly have a kid. I hope other than that, be having some fun.
Next month is my birthday, and this year is one of the more significant ones. This is the year that I turn 40. And I know that for some of you listening to this, you might think that I'm still just a kid and I don't know how young I really am. And for other people hearing this, 40 is such a long ways off that it's almost impossible to think about what life will be like for you then. As I watch 11-year-old and 18-year-old Alan making predictions about their future, I wonder what they would have thought about 40-year-old Alan. I wonder how they would have pictured hitting the 40-year mark. Frankly, I'm not really sure they would have thought about it very much. All I remember when I was a kid was people having their car filled with black balloons and birthday parties with "Over the Hill" written on a black cake. In actuality, I don't really think I could have even begun to have a sense of what life would be like when I turned 40. But I do still have to wonder what they would say if they saw where we wound up. Is this version of my life what they expected? Does it live up to everything they had hoped and dreamed? I actually know the answer to that question because it's a question that I've asked myself a bunch of times. And the answer is no, life doesn't live up to what I thought it would be at this point. In the lead up to my 30th birthday, I kind of crashed and burned. At least my mental health did. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but a number of things kind of came crashing together to bring about a fairly significant crisis. Fortunately, I found my way into working with a very good therapist who helped me find my way through it. And during that time, in one session where we were talking about identity and aging, he said something fairly profound that has stayed with me. He said, "You should know that it's a normal thing that about every 10 years we take an inventory of our lives. Usually around birthdays that end in 0, we kind of give ourselves a test. And you should also know that everyone fails the test. No one quite lives up to the image that they had in their head. The truth, for all of us, is that life never quite unfolds the way that we thought it was going to. Even if things go well and seem like they've gone according to plan, there are always bumps in the road, major derailments, unexpected twists and turns. We set out on a journey in life, but where we wind up is never really where we thought we were headed when we started. We walk into the forest of life, hoping that the path gets us where we're supposed to go, but never fully knowing what's ahead. The theme for Lent this year is Deep Calls to Deep. This week the theme is Called to Deep Commitment. Today we have two scriptures about people being called to a deeper level of commitment. And in both of those stories, I have to think that neither of them really understood what they were signing up for at the beginning of their journey. Just like 18-year-old Alan sure thought he knew how the world worked and what he was signing up for in life, but in reality didn't have a clue, I also have to think that both Abraham and Peter didn't really understand what they were committing to when they signed up to follow God. I mean, yes, there are promises that God makes to Abraham. And yes, God even warns Abraham that his descendants will go through generations of slavery before they will be rewarded by God. But really, do you really think that Abraham had any meaningful understanding of what that meant? How could he possibly know how life would actually unfold in the coming years and even generations? And Peter, oh my, Peter, he definitely didn't know what he was signing up for. Or maybe, more accurately, what Peter thought he was signing up for was definitely not what Jesus had in mind. Peter clearly thought that following Jesus was going to lead him down this path of power and prestige. Jesus was a hero, and Peter was going to be right there beside him when Jesus sat on the throne in Jerusalem. But in this scripture, we find out that Peter had it all wrong. Jesus makes it very clear that he's not headed for the throne, but instead he's headed for the cross. And what's more, if Peter or anyone else wants to have any share with Jesus, then they had better also pick up their own crosses and follow Jesus down that same path. For both Abraham and Peter, when they started their journeys, I don't think they really had any clue where life was going to take them. That's kind of the point, after all. What both Peter and Abraham committed to was not a particular outcome. It wasn't the fulfillment of a particular vision of life that they thought they wanted. No, the commitment was to a relationship with God. The commitment was to follow that relationship wherever it led to, through the ups and downs. As the Bible says it, I will be your God, and you will be my people. Another way to think about it is that it's a little bit like the commitments that are made in a marriage ceremony. The wording that is used there is that we will be committed to this person for better or worse, because on the day that you make that commitment, you have no idea what's actually ahead. It's not a commitment to a particular outcome in life, but rather a commitment to live it with a particular person, regardless of what comes. Today, I'm inviting us all to a deeper level of commitment to God, which I have to admit is kind of an interesting thing to do, mainly because there are a couple of ways that this conversation can go. In the last 20 years, I've spent a lot of time in conversations with other church leaders trying to figure out what church looks like in a changing culture and landscape. And it's true, there have been some massive changes in what it means for people to be committed to a church community. For starters, church attendance has declined massively in the last 50 years. But it's not even just the total numbers. It's the very definition of being committed that has changed. I saw one study a few years ago that pointed out that in the 80s and 90s, people who said they attended church regularly were at the church at least once a week, probably 2 to 3 times a week. But even just 20 years later, people who saw themselves in that same category of regular attenders were only showing up to church maybe twice a month. And then there's the whole question of finding people to serve on committees. Not only are there fewer people in most churches to draw from, but in general, more and more people don't want to commit to a multi-year position of responsibility. This is all to say that what it has meant to be committed to God and to the church has undergone some pretty serious changes over the last generation or so. But I'm also not exactly sure that that's really the kind of commitment that we need to be talking about. Yes, I do think that the church is still the primary instrument for God to be at work in the world. And I think that figuring out how to create and maintain some structures that help us do that work in a changing world is actually really important. However, the commitment that God calls us to is not a commitment to simply maintain an institution, let alone an institution built for a world that existed 100 years ago. What I think God is really calling us to is the same thing that Abraham and Peter were called to. We're called to a deeper relationship with God. We're called to follow wherever God leads. We're called to a trust that even though we walk through the forest of life that obscures our view of what's ahead, that God will be with us, no matter where the path leads. We're called to commit to being the people of God, which means a whole lot more than just sitting across the room from some people once a week while we all listen to someone talk at us. It means committing to really sharing the ups and downs of life together. To weep with those who weep, to rejoice with those who rejoice. Everyone has their own road to walk in their relationship with God. We're all at different places. Where we are today is not where we started. And it certainly isn't where we're going to wind up. Today, God is calling us all to the next step in our journey. We're called to dive deeper into our relationship with God. We're called to commit more fully, not to a particular path, but rather to the God who leads us through the woods.